everyone, thank you guys so much for coming back to my channel. My name's Bran with Budget with Bran. Today we're going to be doing something a little bit different. I wanted to kind of give an outline or my interpretation of how a budget should be created. Now I just want to preface that this is what I do when starting a budget. I did have a little not a side hustle because I didn't charge anyone, but I did do like a little side gig where I would actually create budgets for friends and family. They would give me their expenses and their income, and I would actually create a budget and an outline on Excel, send that over to them as an outline of what I feel they should be doing. So I just wanted to throw that disclaimer out there as I'm not an expert. This is just how I start my budgets, and I wanted to share that with the rest of you guys. So let's go ahead and get started. Okay, so there are a couple things to consider when starting a budget, and I'm gonna go ahead and write them down. The first thing to consider is your budget is personal. This is completely up to you. It's your expenses, the things that you have to pay for. You have to explain to everyone why you're paying for something or why you're not paying for something. So that's just always something that I think is really important. The second thing to consider is creating a budget is always meant to put yourself ahead. You should never put yourself in the negative or put yourself delinquent on any of your bills. A budget is a plan to make sure that everything is paid on time. You're saving for the future, or you have goals in mind that you want to hit. And that's what I want to go with my last point, is to be intentional. Be intentional with what you write down on a piece of paper, what you put on that Excel spreadsheet. Just do it to the best of your ability and try not to shy from, what your intentions are. Of course, we all know that you can't plan the future, so things are going to happen, and that's completely okay. But for the most part, it should be good to at least be intentional with what you have planned. That way you're able to succeed down the road. Now, when creating a budget, the first thing that I always do, like I said, this is my personal opinion, but the first thing that I always do is I figure out what all the bills are. What are my obligations for that month? Now, these are things that I would consider that have a due date, things that I'm going to have to pay every single month, things that are going to be constantly coming in and out of my budget. And these are only bills. Like I said, as far as like variable expenses such as groceries and stuff, we'll talk about those later. But the first thing that I always like to ask people is, what are your bills and what days that they are due? So take everything that you are obligated to pay and assign them by their due date from the 1st to the 30th. Another reason why it's so important to arrange your bills by their due date is because this will also create a map of how we plan on paying our bills with the consistency that we get paid. After we go ahead and arrange all our bills by the due date, the second thing we want to do is understand our income. How you are paid will determine how much you'll bring in for each month. So the best thing to do is to get with your employer and figure out your pay schedule, how much you're going to be getting paid and how frequent you're going to be getting paid. When determining your monthly income, take the amount of checks that you're going to receive in that month and add them all together. So if you get paid twice a month, you're going to take both of your paychecks and add them, and that's how much your monthly pay is. These factors, of course, will also change depending on how often you work. So what type of pay are you receiving? Now, what I'm going to go ahead and do is list the different types of pay that are pretty average across all types of employers, and my personal suggestion on how to get your monthly income based off of your pay frequency. So the first thing is salary pay. Now, salary pay, it's pretty easy to determine your monthly pay because normally on average salaried workers get paid the same amount each time. So you can just base your monthly pay off of how much your paychecks are. So if you're paid salary but you're paid 3 times a month, then you would want to take that salary paycheck and times it by 3. If you're only paid 2 times a month, then you would take those salary paychecks and times them by 2 to get your monthly income. Now, hourly pay is a lot different because depending on your employer and what type of employee you are, whether that's full-time or part-time, the amount of hours that you work will vary. For instance, I'm an hourly worker, but my employer requires me to work 40 hours a week, and that will never change. So my pay is a lot more consistent. It hardly varies. My paychecks are the same each and every time. When I first started working, my hours were very inconsistent. One week I would work 28 hours and the next week I would work 32 hours. So it was really inconsistent. My suggestion on this type of pay budget, the least amount of hours that you will ever work. So take on average how many hours you work per week, and if lowest amount of that is about 28 hours out of 40 hours, then I would budget your income based off of that 28-hour paycheck. It's super important to underestimate your monthly income and afford your bills off of that amount. The reason for this is because you don't want to overestimate your pay and then not get paid that amount and then be put into the red. So if you are an hourly worker with inconsistent hours, then always budget on the least amount of hours that you will ever work. Now with commission pay, there are different types of commission. You either get like an hourly rate and then commission on top of that, or you can just be 100% commission-based pay. My suggestion would do the same as hourly, where you're budgeting off of the least amount that you normally on average make, to make sure that you can afford your bills off of that amount. In the instance that you are a commission-based worker, if you do happen to make more than what you budget, I would suggest creating a plan to get yourself ahead. So if your budget allows, use that money to prepay for bills in the future. That way, if you are not working as much, or if you go on vacation, or your sales don't look that good, then you're covered because you already planned ahead and paid for those bills to be proactive. So after determining what your monthly take-home pay is, subtract your bills by that amount. So we're gonna go ahead and take our monthly income and subtract it by our bill, and we should have a remainder amount. Now, of course, this isn't a perfect world. If for any reason you're not able to afford your bills off of the income that you are receiving, my main suggestion would be to figure out a way to receive more income, because we are only budgeting off of our bills right now. If you don't have enough money to do that, then you're not going to be able to afford necessities like groceries, gas, utilities, all those things. With the remainder amount that we do receive is what we're going to do to budget our non-negotiable variable expenses. Now, what I would consider non-negotiable variable expenses are things that you need to basically survive, things that are necessities. So some examples of this would be things like groceries, gas for your car, so that if you do have a car, you have a means to go to work and get paid. Utilities. I would consider medical expenses a non-negotiable variable expense, because we never know when we're going to be getting sick. Now, if you have an employer like I do, where you have an MRA, or you have the ability to fund a health spending account and your employer does offer that, then this medical expense doesn't really need to be in your budget. But in the event that your employer does not offer that, or if you do not have benefits, then at that point I would consider medical to be a non-negotiable expense. Clothing, now I would, if you are on a tight budget, I would keep this to a minimum. For example, I mean, me and my husband, we do make a good amount of money. However, I just choose to not spend that much on clothes. I actually just go to the Goodwill and I get really good deals there and really cute clothes there. So I personally shop at the Goodwill, but I do think clothing is a non-negotiable variable expense, because we do need clothes to go to work. My last thing would be considered hygiene, so household supplies such as laundry detergent, toothpaste, soap, shampoo and conditioner. Make sure that this is always worked into your budget as well. With considering our non-negotiable variable expenses, our main priority at this point is to make sure we can afford the necessities first, and then budget the luxuries after the fact. So in these cases, such as groceries and gas, it's always important to budget as close to your actual usage as possible. An example would be if you are a family of 5 and you normally spend $600 on groceries, you want to make sure that you're putting $600 into your budget. If your budget allows, do not underestimate your actual usage, because if, for instance, you budget like $400, you're always going to be going into the negative, because you normally don't spend $400, you normally spend $600. After we figure out what all of our non-negotiable variable expenses are, we are going to take our remainder and we're going to minus it by our non-negotiables, and then we're going to be with our leftover. Anything that is left over from the expenses needed to survive, and also the bills or the monthly obligations that you need to pay, anything that is left over after all of that is completely up to you. So this is where your budget personalization comes in. Now, a couple of examples could be savings, and this could include things like car maintenance, your property taxes. This could include saving for your vehicle registration, an emergency fund, So on a rainy day, if something does happen, you have something to pull out of. You don't have to be putting it on a credit card or going into the negative with your budget to make your other bills suffer. Sinking funds, which I would consider a little bit different than savings, because savings I would consider things that are like necessary, such as, like I said, car registration, property taxes. Sinking funds are kind of things that are infrequent, so like Christmas, things that are always going to happen but are not as frequent. The last thing would be towards debt. So I personally am on a debt-free journey, so most of the money that I have left over is going towards my debt payoff plan, to make sure that I'm debt-free within a certain amount of time. So whatever you do with the leftover is completely up to you and completely personal to what you have in mind, what you have as far as your goals and how you want to be financially successful. After we come to the point where we realize, okay, yes, I can afford everything, I can afford my bills, I can afford the necessities that I need, my non-negotiable expenses. With us having listed all of our bills and when they are due, we can actually map out how we are going to be paying these bills every month. Now, this all determines on our pay schedule and our pay frequency. So I have a couple suggestions on how you can pay your bills based off of how frequent you're getting paid. So the first thing would be bi-weekly pay, and that's getting paid every 2 weeks. If you want to understand how a bi-weekly pay budgeter budgets their expenses, I am a bi-weekly pay budgeter. So you can look at my past videos on how I get ahead on my expenses, how I pay my expenses every 2 weeks. Now, with bi-weekly pay, there are about 2 methods that I do see people using. Now, the method that I personally use is to just pay my bills in full when they are due. So an example would be, one of my checks covers all expenses due from the 1st to the 15th of that month. And then my second check covers all expenses due from the 15th to the 30th. Now, I personally do this because it's a lot less hassle. My budget allows me to do this, and also because I don't want to be scrounging around or figure out, okay, this check is going to pay this check. I just group them all together and pay them all at once. The other example is kind of like the save method, save as you go method, and that's saving half of your expenses with one check and then saving the other half with the second check. So if I have a bill that is $100, I would split $50 with my first check and $50 with my second check. And by the time that bill is due, it's gonna I have enough money to pay it. If you are gonna be doing this method, which a lot of people do this method, then what I would suggest is to plan ahead. Let's say I have a bill, this $100 bill is due on the 18th of that month. And I get paid on, let's say, February 1st, and I get paid on February 15th. I would need to save the first half of this $100 bill on February 1st and the second half on February 15th to have the full amount to pay by February 18th. Now, there are some people that get paid weekly, so they get paid every week. And a perfect example of this is Maury June. She is a YouTuber here. She gets paid on a weekly basis, and she does a great job budgeting her expenses. So something that she does is she saves 1/4 of her bills every week to be able to afford them when they are due. So that is something that you can also do, and if you want to know how to do that, head over to Maury June's channel. Another example is to just take care of all the bills that are due on that week. So for instance, I'm just gonna pull up October as an example. So if you're paid on the 2nd, and you have bills due on the 5th, 7th, and the 8th, then the payment that you get on the 2nd will cover those bills. When you get paid on the 9th, you'll cover all the bills that are due from the 9th to the 16th, and pretty much continue to do that to afford all of your bills. Bi-monthly pay, so only twice a month. And normally people get paid on the 1st and the 15th, 15th and the 30th, the 5th and the 24th. It really does depend on your employer, but the difference between bi-monthly and bi-weekly is that no matter what, you're getting paid every 2 weeks with bi-weekly. With bi-monthly, no matter how long that month is, you're only getting paid 2 times. I would consider you to budget the same way as a bi-weekly check, where you're paying all your bills with one check, half of your bills with one check, the other half with another check. And some YouTubers that you can look at, Lisa Marie Budgets, She also gets paid salary, or Ivana plans life. Her situation is interesting because I'm sure there are a lot of other people who might have this situation where I think she gets paid every 2 weeks, but her husband gets paid bi-monthly. So their pay dates are constantly different. She figures out a way to make sure all her bills are paid. And then one person that also has that is the budget queen. If you really want to look at someone who's on top of their budget and really plans for every single paycheck that they are receiving, go ahead and check out the budget queen as well. And of course, if you get paid only once a month, then you would want to budget all of your expenses, everything at once. Now, a good rule of thumb is to keep yourself on auto pay. That way you don't have to worry when your bills are going to be coming out. It's automatically coming out. And a really good YouTuber to look at for this is Romina Vasquez. She is self-employed and she only pays herself once a month. So she figures out all of her expenses once a month, and she kind of keeps a plan on how to stay on track. The best part about figuring out how you're going to be mapping out your bills is completely up to you. But your plan should always be to pay your bills on time and pay them in full. We never want to fall delinquent on our bills. That's not the point of creating a budget. If for any reason your income cannot cover all of your bills and the basic necessities just to survive, we either need to, one, find other sources of income, either take out any unnecessary bills or reduce any expenses. So for instance, if you're that family of 5 and you normally spend $600 a month, but there are some times that you get away with $550 or even $500, then that's where, you know, I would go first to try to reduce the expenses that you have. In my budget, I would probably take out like internet because I have a phone plan, I have data, so I can use internet for that. Another thing in my budget to go would probably be my pet insurance. I can always just save that after the fact till I'm able to afford it again. You can call your providers and see if anything can be discounted. Call your cable company, call your phone company and say, hey, look, I mean, I've been a customer for a while now. Is there any way that I can get a discount, a deal, just to save some room for your budget in the event that you cannot afford? The last thing I do want to bring up is to don't be afraid if you don't get it right the first time. Budgeting your expenses can be super overwhelming, and I'm pretty sure it leaves a lot of us like just scratching our heads or just quitting altogether. The good thing about it is practicing does get a lot easier, and as you start to pay your bills, you really do get yourself into a rhythm where you know, okay, this check's going to here, I'm going to pay this with this bill, I'm going to be saving this money. So you really do get a good idea or a good grasp on what needs to be paid and what's important to your goals and also your personal financial future. So luckily there are a lot of people in the budget community that are really good people to look up to for advice and also to kind of give you an idea on how to budget. I'm gonna go ahead and link everyone that I mentioned down below, just so that if you guys do want to check them out, please hop over to the channels and see what you can take from everyone's budgeting. So that's all I have for today. I hope you guys enjoyed the video. Don't forget to subscribe to my channel, Budget with Bran. I really do hope that this helps someone out there. And of course, if you have any questions, feel free to leave them in the comments down below. I am open to answering any questions that you do have. So yeah, that's all I have for this week. I will see you guys in a couple days. Bye!